Hello and welcome to Monster of the Week, the only show on the internet that thinks you can have your cake and eat it too. Go on. You deserve it. Today, we are talking about a very special monster, the Pie Fiend. Those of you who've been around for a while know that every year on April Fools, I like to cover a monster who's a bit silly. You know, just doing a few goofs and gaffs while also taking a genuine look at a creature from D&D's long and storied past. As we do. In years gone by, we've covered some absolute bangers in the goofy monster department, but this one might just take the cake. Or the pie, if you will. As always, we're going to talk about this monster's history, both from a publication standpoint, but also its in-game history and lore, as well as some plot hooks and ways you might be able to use this bad boy in your D&D campaign. Also, as always, I've converted this monster into 5th edition D&D, but not without a few, shall we say, adjustments. But we'll get to that in due time. For now, cut yourself a piece of pie, maybe grab some tea or coffee to go with it, and prepare your brain to learn everything there is to know about one of the D&D monsters of all time. So first and foremost, yes, this is an official D&D monster published through official channels for Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition. However, unlike the vast majority of monsters I cover on this channel, it wasn't published in an old adventure book or one of the magazines, but rather on the internet.
All you need is a computer and a regular phone line. They send you the software and give you 10 free hours to check it out.
Back in the day, the old Wizards of the Coast website used to host tons of articles and pages that often contained content for the game that didn't really fit anywhere else. It would often be stuff that was attached to projects which were cancelled, but some of the work was already done, or it would be things that were cut from full releases because they either ran out of space or time. But once in a while, it would be something that was specifically created to be exclusively available online. Unfortunately, all of these pages were eventually taken down, and the only way to access them is by using web archive tools like the Wayback Machine.
Hackerman. He's the most powerful hacker of all time.
This at least allows us to see the text contained on the page, which is all we really need, but it does mean that whatever mysterious images were once contained within this article are now lost to time. But thankfully, the Pie Fiend and all of its associated stats are still intact because, holy shit, I love this monster.
Well, this is joyous news.
As a bit of a cheeky April Fool's post, Skip Williams, better known as the co-creator of D&D 3rd edition and the dude behind the Sage Advice column in Dragon magazine, decided to post a new monster article detailing the stats and ecology of the Pie Fiend. And despite some vague similarities in body shape, this thing is nothing like the Pit Fiend we know and love. Pie Fiends are large in size, standing about 12 feet tall, with a burly body to boot. They've got all the classic telltale signs of a devil in their big leathery bat wings, massive horns, cloven hooves, and menacing disposition. However, Pie Fiends are also most often adorned in a leather apron, and many parts of their body are dusted with a fine layer of white flour. And yes, it's definitely, totally just flour.
Now it's time to do some coke off the blade of a knife.
Unlike most devils, who smell of fire and brimstone, they reek of cinnamon and spices. And of course, in place of a menacing weapon, they use a massive rolling pin, which is treated as a club for mechanical purposes. Now, I'll admit, when I first heard about this creature, I fully expected this to be the place where its lore and mechanics came to an end. Like, we get it. Its name sounds like Pit Fiend, but it's actually a devil who makes pies. Isn't that silly? Devils aren't supposed to make pies. How innocent and goofy of them. The audacity to propose such a creature. But the Pie Fiend isn't innocent and goofy. It's terrifying and scary. The fact that you think it's silly is entirely by its infernal design. Only when your companions have been devoured by its minions, the town burnt to cinders, and you're left alone, burning alive in a pie crust prison of the devil's making, will you fully understand how dangerous this creature is. But by then, it will be too late. Happy April Fools! I was genuinely taken aback by how much thought and effort went into the creation of this creature, both for its lore and history stuff, as well as its mechanics and its full stat block. So let me tell you a bit about that. Within the world of D&D, their existence is only known among scholars who are extremely well versed in matters of the Nine Hells. And even then, they're so rare that many sages believe them to be nothing more than a rumor. This isn't helped by the fact that Pie Fiends have the ability to change their appearance on the fly to that of a humanoid creature, so as you can imagine, confirming their existence is no small task from an in-game perspective. This means that both in and out of game, their very existence is largely unknown among most adventurers, which is something the Pie Fiend is happy to capitalize on. And this is just great from a metagame perspective, right? Just think about it. When you're trudging through the halls of a dungeon and see an old wooden treasure chest sitting unattended, if you're even vaguely aware of fantasy tropes, alarm bells probably start going off. That's a mimic, and even if it's not, there's no harm in being cautious as we approach, because it's definitely a mimic, right? However, when you've returned from the dungeon, sitting around a tavern table with your pals, slamming a few pints and counting up the treasure, you're probably not going to jump to DEFCON 1 when the kind old woman who runs the bakery across the road brings you a freshly baked pie to thank you for protecting the town. But you should be. You should be real scared, actually. This should be the scariest thing that's happened to you today. Pie Fiends are, of course, devils, which means that their primary motivation is the collection of mortal souls, both to fuel their magic and use as currency within the Nine Hells. And despite their goofy aesthetic, this is a role they take very seriously, and it's a role they excel in. They are exceptionally gifted manipulators, due in part to their shape-changing abilities, and often worm their way into unsuspecting communities in order to sow fear, doubt, and vice among mortals. But in order to understand just exactly how they do that and how effective they are at doing so, we need to talk about what mechanical abilities this creature is actually capable of. So let's just take a quick break from plotting the downfall of society as we know it and talk about what this bad boy can do. Pie Fiends are sincerely no joke. Well, I mean, they are literally a joke, but you know what I'm saying. Clocking in at CR 13, they bring some real hefty stats to the table. Hefty. While there is no official information given about where they stand in the hierarchy of the Nine Hells, going by their power level alone, this likely puts them above Chain Devils, Bone Devils, Orthons, Horned Devils, and Arenes, and leaves only 6 other devils above them, in 5th edition at least. As I mentioned, they have the ability to change their shape, and they do this by using an action called Alter Self, which works exactly the same way as the spell of the same name, except it also allows them to change their size to medium or small. They've also got a club attack, wherein they can flatten the target with a big-ass rolling pin, and of course they've got their most iconic attack, the Throw Pie action. And despite its apparent simplicity, this ability takes a little bit of explaining. So, Pie Fiends as a bonus action can literally just summon a pie in the palm of their hand. They can do this any number of times per day, and the pie they summon can be of any variety. I'm talking fruit pies, meat pies, custard pies, cream pies. The pie's the limit. And that's great. They just have a literally infinite supply of pies, which is kind of wild when you think about it for too long. If you're a dungeon master who's particularly concerned about preserving the economy of the world you live in, you might want to put a governor on that. But as written, they just make pies when they want to. And of course, they can use these pies as a weapon to deal 1d4 plus 8 bludgeoning damage to anything they throw them at. However, they are also capable of conjuring special pies infused with fiendish essence that have varying effects. Their bread and butter pie based weaponry is either the cold pie or hot pie, depending on their opponent. One is infused with shards of ice from Stygia, and the other is infused with hellfire. Both pies deal an additional 2d6 cold or fire damage respectively, and have potential to continuously damage their target for multiple rounds until the cursed pie filling is washed away with an action. This works pretty much the same way as being on fire does, except instead of dousing the flames, you're scraping off pie stuff. Due to the Fiend's multi-attack, this means every turn they can summon a pie of their choosing with a bonus action, throw it at an enemy, and then make 2 club attacks. Or they can just simply make 3 club attacks and call it a day. If the Pie Fiend isn't after damage though, it can instead opt to make a sticky pie, which is described as being sort of meringue adjacent. This one doesn't deal extra damage, but it will restrain the target indefinitely until they can break out themselves or douse the pie debris with acid to wash it away. This is a much more situational option than just adding some extra damage to an attack, but it's going to come in handy when the Pie Fiend is trying to shut down a specific opponent 100%. Lastly, once per day, it can craft a pie known as a sinfully delicious pie. This pie is a bit different than the others, as it's not intended to be used as a weapon. Any creature who takes a bite of this pie is overcome with fits of ecstasy that force the creature to make a DC 20 wisdom save, and if they fail, they're straight up stunned for a full minute. In the original stat block, eating this pie would affect you differently depending on what your alignment was. If you were a good aligned character, it would cause you to be overcome with a feeling of guilt, as if you'd done something wrong, but you weren't sure what. And if you were an evil aligned character, it would cause you to start literally dancing with joy. In 5th edition, alignment isn't as much of a big deal, so I just simplified it to an effect basically equivalent to what it originally did. However, I do really like the flavor, no pun intended, of this pie, making the one eating it act out of character. Just the thought that the edgy assassin rogue might take a bite of this pie and suddenly start dancing is hilarious to me. Or that the stalwart cleric might enjoy their piece and then feel overcome with guilt, as if they've done something they weren't supposed to do. In the original article, there's actually a short story about a paladin who goes through this exact situation. He describes the feeling of eating this pie as better than being in the living presence of his deity. So while not necessarily the most useful in combat, it can be a brutal ambush tactic if the Pie Fiend can somehow convince someone to take a bite. But even outside of combat and battle related purposes, these pies are an invaluable resource to the Fiend. Their taste is so supernaturally incredible that they often use them as a bargaining chip when convincing a mortal to give up their soul. This is unlikely to be a pitch that's accepted by brave adventurers, but your average commoner likely doesn't possess that same force of will or understanding of the cosmic ramifications that giving up their soul might entail. In a more sinister light, this could even be considered something akin to fostering a substance addiction amongst the populace of a town. And that's super evil, but also definitely something that a literal devil would do. Now this creature's stat block is a big one. We've still got 4 more abilities to quickly go over here, and one of them is a whole thing, so let's just get right to it. To start off, it can use an action called Heat Wall. This ability is on a recharge of 5 to 6, and it's pretty much the same as casting Wall of Fire, except the wall isn't made of literal fire, but made of heat. The one major difference is that the heat wall is transparent, so you can see through it. It just looks like heat waves radiating off the surface of the area it covers. And just like the spell, it can be up to 60 feet long, 20 feet high, or it can be in a 20-foot circle. This is a great option if you've ever used the spell Wall of Fire on one of your D&D characters in the past. I don't need to tell you why, but it can not only cause a lot of damage, it's also a brilliant way to control the battlefield and the flow of movement. However, it really shines in conjunction with the Pie Fiend's second ability, Make into a Pie. This ability works in multiple stages. First, the Fiend produces a sheet of buttery, flaky pie crust.
Baked on a buttery, crispy crust.
Then it hurls that sheet of crust at a creature it can see within 100 feet. If the target fails their dexterity save, they are restrained by the dough. This is obviously not awesome, no one wants to be restrained. However, the real kicker here is that if a creature covered in this pie crust takes fire damage from any source, that source deals the maximum amount of damage possible. You can probably see where this is going. If it uses this ability to restrain a creature in dough, and then casts its Heat Wall ability in a circle surrounding that creature, instead of taking the normal 5d8 damage dealt by Heat Wall, an average of 22 fire damage, the target will instead just take 40 fire damage every turn they remain trapped, which literally allows the Pie Fiend to bake someone alive in just a matter of a few rounds. And that's not even factoring in any other fire damage that might be coming from the pies being thrown by the Fiend, or from other combatants who are also targeting the creature it has restrained. So while it might be funny to get entangled in pie crust, it will quickly become apparent that it wasn't really pie crust that the Fiend threw at you, it was crust for your fucking casket. Rest in pie. Third on the docket is the Pie Fiend's Waves of Contentment ability. This ability allows the Pie Fiend to conjure an alluring scent reminiscent of freshly baked pies and pastries. Anyone who has a sense of smell and is in the area when this goes off must make a DC 18 Wisdom save or be charmed by the Pie Fiend. While charmed by the Pie Fiend in this way, the creature is overcome with a feeling of just vibes and being happy with the current state of affairs. They're totally content. and they can take no actions. It can only do this once per day, and it's sort of meant as a tool in the Pie Fiend's back pocket that it can bust out to quickly end a combat that's not going its way, or maybe even shut down a combat it doesn't want to take place before it even happens. If the charmed creature does take any damage, the charm is immediately broken, but this can be a great way for the fiend to either trap its enemies or simply cause a few of them to stop fighting, allowing it to make a quick escape. And all of that combined makes for a pretty interesting and dynamic encounter, I think. But there is one final ability that got a bit out of hand in my conversion of this monster. So the original Pie Fiend back in 3rd edition has an action called Animate Pie, and this action functions exactly the same way as the Animate Object spells, except it targets pies. This is pretty cool. I mean, having a whirlwind of pies floating around you that can be sent after your enemy is both whimsical and terrifying. So if you like this ability, I encourage you to give your Pie Fiend access to Animate Object or any other spells you find thematic. In fact, leave a comment with your favorite spell that a Pie Fiend might be able to cast. I'm sure there are tons of them out there that can be reflavored to fit this encounter perfectly. And adding spells to a monster is always a great way to ratchet up the tension if you're dealing with a party who might be a bit overleveled to face this threat. But all that said, I decided to take the concept of this action and push it just a bit further. See, devils are infamous in older editions for summoning more devils, and while that isn't as important to their identity in 5th edition, it's always been something I found really interesting about them. So rather than just animating pies within the room, I gave my version of the Pie Fiend an action called Animate Baked Goods. This ability allows the Pie Fiend to permanently transform 1d4 baked goods within 60 feet of it into a brand new creature I created specifically for this video. The Pastry. I know, Pastry isn't even close to as good of a pun as Pie Fiend, but frankly it's embarrassing how long I try to think of a better name for this thing, and Pastry is what we're getting.
Get what you deserve!
I think it does the job, but if you can think of something better, hit me up in the comments with your best imp pastry puns. But with this decision, it meant that I was now creating an entirely new creature to act as the Pie Fiend's army of minions. So I did what any DM worth their salt looking to create some homebrew does, and I got cooking. Alright, so today we're going to be baking up a brand new little creature to accompany the Pie Fiend, something that I'm calling the Pastry.
I'm gonna whip you up a nice, unnameable horror from beyond.
Pastries come in many shapes and sizes, all of which are indicative of a delicious baked good. You got your pies, cookies, cupcakes, croissant, anything you can name can potentially be a devious little hellspawn. But while they all may appear somewhat different, they've all got the same stats, and they're all created essentially the same way. Basically, the Pie Fiend can take any baked good and infuse it with the soul of a mortal, mixing in a dash of infernal magic, and of course, the most important ingredient of all, love. And don't skimp on that infernal magic neither, it's the only way to get a buttery, flaky crust.
Baked on a buttery, crispy crust.
Once the little bastard wakes up, it's gonna be on the warpath, ready to assist the Pie Fiend in any way it can, which usually means maiming others with its stab attack. It might be claws, it might be a stinging tail, doesn't matter. All you need to know is that this dessert can and will do its best to get the blood inside another guy's body to be on the outside of the other guy's body.
Nobody makes me bleed my own blood. Nobody!
Of course, it also has the false appearance trait, meaning that while the Pastry is completely motionless, you can't tell whether it's just a little pastry or a literal devil waiting to gouge your fucking eyes out, watching you. But even in this docile state, nobody is safe from the Pastry. If you take a bite of this thing, whether it's just you thinking you're taking a bite of a delicious pie or actually making a bite attack, yeesh, that's gonna be a bunch of poison damage coming your way. I mean, come on, it's made of fiendish essence and mortal souls. That ain't exactly keto friendly. But what kind of dingus bites a devil pie? Especially when it's walking around and not masquerading as a normal pie. Well, you maybe. Similar to its creator, the Pastry can also emit an intoxicating scent that flows on the breeze, smelling of baked goods and joy. Though unlike the Pie Fiend, anyone who catches a whiff of this scent is not made docile, but compelled to use all their movement to get as close as possible to the Pastry. And then, if they've still got an action and they're standing next to it, they have to make a bite attack against the little devil. The worst part is that this attack always hits, so yeah, the paste strip is going to take some damage, but it ain't nothing compared to the damage it sends back the other way. This ability also grants the affected creature a fly speed equal to half their walking speed, so even if the paste strip is up somewhere high, like on a windowsill or something, anyone who catches a whiff of this pie is going to float on over. It is worth noting that the forced movement doesn't say you have to walk, so theoretically, an affected creature could choose to use the slow-moving fly speed they now have to buy some extra time, but they're gonna look like a goofy asshole while they're doing it.
I want you to resist the urge to levitate off the ground and float towards the pie.
Doesn't seem too hard.
All these details come together in a nice little recipe that ends up with the Pie Fiend having a baker's dozen of minions to help it fight, scheme, and otherwise sow discord within their respective communities. I think all the mechanics here have the potential to make this encounter both intense and highly memorable, which is great. But of course, now we need to talk about just exactly how we would use this monster to tell a story. And let's just say, I've got a few ideas. Just using this monster as written, there's lots of potential here for plot hooks involving a Pie Fiend. Using their ability to shapeshift, I could see a Pie Fiend operating in a village as a kindly old grandma type who loves to bake things for the other residents. Little do they know, the Fiend's baking is subtly influencing their behavior in a long con to eventually collect all their souls. It would then fall on the party to unmask the Fiend and take them down. And who knows, maybe the party is called to this town because there's been strange things being reported there. Mysterious creatures in the night have been kidnapping the locals or causing some kind of havoc. These creatures, of course, would turn out to be the Pastrimps, all acting on behalf of their creator. To add another layer to this, perhaps there have been sightings or rumors of fiendish baked goods, and these rumors have made their way back to a renowned scholar known for studying devils. They believe this could be the work of a Pie Fiend, and proving that these creatures exist would be the discovery of a lifetime. So they do what any wealthy scholar in that situation would do, and hire a group of adventurers to go check it out, offering them a massive reward if they can bring back proof of the Pie Fiend's existence. You could even expand the scope of this and have the Pie Fiend operating as the owner of a bakery in a major city. By day, they're nothing more than a normal baker, serving the city some fantastic baked goods. But by night, they're a soul-stealing menace with their hooks and several major players within the community. Maybe instead of a bid for someone's soul, they have the local authorities at their beck and call, controlling them with a pie supply they simply can't get enough of.
I couldn't have enough. Okay, one more. I'm gonna have one more and then that'll be it.
And come to think of it, isn't there another pastry-based drug-dealing plot within the pages of a D&D book? I mean, it's a book I don't talk about that much, so you might be surprised to hear me say this, but for those of you unfamiliar with Curse of Strahd, without getting into heavy spoilers, there is a certain hag who loves to peddle what she calls dream pastries to the people of Barovia. In her case, the pastries literally act like a hallucinogenic, allowing the one eating the pie to escape the horrors of Ravenloft for 8 hours, give or take. And of course, those pies contain some less than savory ingredients. So perhaps your Pie Fiend is doing the same thing, just rip off that plot element wholesale, except they're doing it in a city on the material plane. Or better yet, if you're playing through Curse of Strahd, maybe a Pie Fiend is competing with the hags by peddling confections of their own design in a sort of drug war, but with pies. Another thing I thought of, which isn't included in the original lore, but I felt could be a really interesting addition to this creature's whole deal, would be the inclusion of a recipe book. I know that doesn't sound that exciting, but stick with me for a sec. Something that is canon, which I haven't mentioned yet, is that Pie Fiends all have a massive sweet tooth. They love eating baked goods and will often find and steal unattended sweets, replacing them with their own creations. This is partially due to the fact that they want to trick others into eating cursed pies, for the bit, but also, they just like eating pastries, and quite frankly, I find it hard to hold that against them. But this, of course, got me thinking, what if every Pie Fiend had a prized possession? A recipe book filled with dessert recipes, both mundane and magical. This book could act sort of like a spellcasting focus that enabled them to summon the pies they create at will, perhaps allowing them to summon anything they have the recipe for in their book. And that would add a whole new potential motivation to the Pie Fiend. I like the idea that anytime a Pie Fiend catches wind of a new dessert recipe it hasn't tried before, it feels compelled to add that recipe to its book. Perhaps it's even willing to break soul contracts with an individual if they're able to provide the Fiend with a rare recipe it doesn't already have. And in that case, perhaps the adventure is all about this party trying to help some poor sod get out of his contract by traveling to a distant land and procuring a rare recipe on behalf of the devil. Conversely, if the party already has a rare recipe, this gives them something to bargain with other than their soul. And it also opens the door to other magical confections. If you've got any ideas for a baked good that has a new effect not already listed on its stat block, perhaps you add that to its stat block. Maybe it's got a lava cake made with real lava or something that I can create that does a shit ton of fire damage. Or maybe they're after the recipe to make a magical angel's food cake that can heal wounds just so they can corrupt it and spread a powerful curse through the land. And while all of that stuff might be interesting in varying degrees, it also means that this spell book or recipe book becomes an object of immense value to the Pie Fiend. So, if someone were to steal this tome, they might be willing to trade just about anything to get it back. Even if your adventuring group isn't the party responsible for stealing the book, perhaps they are tasked by the devil with returning the cookbook in exchange for passage to the 9 hells or the release of a soul contract or something else that they want. Or maybe they've been hired to steal the recipe book from another Pie Fiend who lives in the area that won't share some super secret millennia's old recipe of great value. The grand cookbook heist sounds like a wild time.
Rated R, only in theaters Friday.
For those of you who are avid Dungeon Dad enjoyers, you may also be aware that these creatures are far from the only monster out there that enjoys sweet treats or the culinary arts. Reef giants, a monster I covered a few months back, are extremely fond of sweets. If you haven't seen that video, basically, quick crash course, they're noble giants that live solitary lives at the bottom of the sea in gigantic mansions with family names that stretch back thousands of years. And they like pie. A lot. So there could be a connection there. Perhaps the Pie Fiend has a reef giant, or maybe even a few reef giants under its control, using the aforementioned drug pies as leverage. Or maybe the giant is the impetus to this whole thing. They ate one of the Pie Fiend's pies, not realizing it was actually a pastrimp, and got super sick. So they called up their adventuring party pals to go check it out, emphasizing that it was no mere food poisoning, but a sickness of the soul worthy of investigation. That, of course, would require a previous connection with an existing reef giant, and if you want to do that, I made a whole video about them. Watch the other video. The other monster that comes to mind is actually a dragon. The brown dragon, to be exact. They aren't specifically after dessert, but all food in general, which includes dessert, I'm pretty sure. Brown dragons go out of their way to taste new and exciting foods from distant lands at great expense to themselves. So perhaps a Pie Fiend could factor in there somehow. In the brown dragon video, I mentioned as a potential plot hook that they might task several groups with finding the most delicious dish on the plane, and they would have a grand prize for whoever could bring them the most tasty meal. And I mean, I feel like a Pie Fiend's sinfully delicious pie could be a great contender for the party to claim the #1 spot. And if that's what they're after, now it's just a matter of tracking one down. And if all else fails, using the Pie Fiend as an unconventional NPC personality in a setting like Planescape or Spelljammer could be really neat. Maybe the ship's cook on your spelljamming vessel is actually a Pie Fiend. Or perhaps your Pie Fiend just runs a really successful bakery in Sigil. Whatever the case, and whatever you choose to do, I truly love this monster. I think it's very fun and silly and whimsical. Obviously, that's kind of the whole point. But I also think it has a lot to bring to the table, no pun intended. Again, I feel like there's like 1,000 puns in this video, but that aside, it's a cool monster. The encounter potential here is through the roof, and it's also quite flavorful. So even though it's meant to be played for laughs, I think it's got potential to make your party both laugh and cry. I also want to give a massive shout out to this week's artist, Tam. You should follow them over on Twitter if you are on Twitter and you are not following them already, because I basically went to Tam with nothing. Like, there's a paragraph of text explaining what the original creature kind of looks like, and they crushed that. And then also when I came to them with this pastry devil idea, they took it and just ran with it. They gave me 1,000 times more than what I could have expected. I'm so happy with how all the artwork turned out here. They're very cute, but also a little sinister, which is exactly what I was after. And if you like this monster and you want to use it in your game, as always, linked in the description down below, there's a Google document. It's got all the stats for both creatures. Everything you need is there. And if you are one of my lovely patrons over on the Dungeon Dad Patreon page, you will of course find the Dungeon Dad patron style stat block, which is all the same information, just a little bit more artwork, a little bit more layout work, a little bit more design. It's very polished, very neat, very cool, very fresh, and it helps support the channel and what I do here. So for those of you subscribed over there, thank you so much. Speaking of patrons, as always, I need to give a massive shout out to our patron of the week. This week's randomly selected patron is Sterling Coleman. Thank you so much for the support, my friend. It means the most. And thank you for watching. As always, if there's a monster from an older edition of D&D or Pathfinder or any other TTRPG out there, or maybe it's just from a random website that doesn't exist anymore, let me know in the comments down below or over the Dungeon Dad Discord in the Creature Suggestions channel, and it will be added to the master list. And who knows? You might just see it show up in a future episode of Monster of the Week. I've been chomping at the bit to cover this monster for like a year. I discovered this very shortly after my April Fool's video last year, so I'm so happy I finally got to talk about it. I think it's absolutely wild, and I really hope you enjoyed this episode because I had a hell of a lot of fun making it. But in any case, well, that's all I got for you this week. Happy April Fool's Day. I hope you didn't get pranked on too hard. And if you did, that's just setting you up for a vengeance arc next year. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Till then.
In the deepest layer of the abyss, something beyond comprehension hides away. What she truly looks like, no one can say. But you definitely won't be able to get away from her by hiding under the covers. Is she a goddess or something much worse? Next episode, Pale Night. Tune in next time for lots more fan service.
Baked in a buttery, crispy flake.